Hi, this is Private Station, and today we'll bring you day 713 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Arestovych, and Nikolay Feldman, Ukrainian journalist, who is hosting the show. Our special thanks go to our dear members. Today it is Anya Kuchta and Clever Pittsburgh. Thank you guys for supporting us. Your support does matter. That helps us to continue bringing this info to people. And do not forget to click the like, share, and subscribe if you have not done that yet. And with this, let's deep dive into day 713. Enjoy. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolay Feldman, and you're watching live War Diary with Alexei Arestovych. He is online with us. Good evening, Alexei. Good evening, everybody. All right, let's start with operative situation on the front. There are several important news about Avdiivka, Kupiansk, and the other hotspots there. If you can, let's start with Avdiivka. I'll bring the map up. Perhaps you can comment on at least Yuriy Butusov, Ukrainian war correspondent, who was writing that Russian troops managed to get to the city territory. There are street fights going on, and the situation is rather critical. And he is also saying that lies in reports on the general level to self-pacify and to not disturb upper leadership with bad news that harms the situation. Previously, we were talking about time when one should not be holding onto the crumbling city. Is that the moment, or is it not yet? Well, there probably are about 100 to a couple hundred yards to the road that is used for supplies to that area. So time or no time is determined by the level of supplies and by the level of losses. So like in Bakhmut, we initially had 1 to 10 when they were storming it, but then when they got to the city limits, it quickly became 1 to 1 in terms of losses. And it's difficult to say with 100% precision, but looking at the supply lines that they're threatened, that definitely shows that this moment is about to come. It is either already here or it's about to happen. And the other factors that affect it is bad weather, so we cannot use effectively our UAVs, FPV drones, and the like, which are the main working factor on the front because we don't have enough shells to counter Russian artillery. And if you go further, zoom out a little, one can say that the enemy has several successes on a certain number of parts of the front. They're tactical, but they're threatening to become operative tactical and maybe in perspective operative level successes. Why? Because we're in another pause organized to us specifically by United States in regards to supply of military equipment and artillery shells that has happened before. And Russian command, either by plan or by accident, but did manage to have enough stockpile of resources, reserves, and human force. And that statement of one of the Brits that there are 40,000 of Russians on Kupiansk direction, 500 tanks, 800 armored vehicles, I do not have a way to verify the exactitude of that statement, but they're roughly in cahoots with the other sources that are commenting on Russian resources on that part, and it's understandable what they're doing. Behind that is likely the idea of getting some successes to the 17th of March, to the re-elections of Putin. They created a stockpile of resources to help them solve certain issues for that date. For example, taking of Kupiansk, taking on Avdiivka, and they're plannedly realizing their advantage, solving their tasks, their strategic tasks. We are in defense, and we don't have much space for maneuver, first of all, because we do not have enough artillery supplies, artillery shells, resources are limited. Remember, Budanov was giving an interview saying that in spring many things will change. Right now the initiatives is behind the Russian side. And it may change only if we get additional material supplies, and will that happen and when? We don't know. Same thing near Rabotina, where President was visiting recently. Russians pushed back and captured back about a half of what we initially acquired from them, and then they continue also pushing near Vugledar and a little north of it. Same logic. Near Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and Belogorsk direction, there was additional pressure over there, right? And additional success, partial success on Svatovo-Liman area. So this is the result of them concentrating certain means and equipment for this time period. It's an indicator that they probably have enough resources to try to take Avdiivka, and they're taking it now. We'll see how our command will dispose of the destinies of the defenders of Avdiivka. Will they have them retreat in time to occupy next line of fortifications? And there are different voices also talking now about the fortification lines, saying that some of them saying that they exist, others say they're not, third ones saying that, well, we'll get there and we'll see if we have anything to fortify with. So yeah, Forbes mentioned about Kupiansk direction that Russia has about 40,000 troops, 500 tanks, about 800 of armored vehicles, and hundreds of artillery systems. If that would be the scale of invasion as Forbes outlined, what would be the threat? Do you think that can collapse a part of the front? No, I don't think this one has the capability to do that, but we will have to fight in that part with all the strain of our capabilities. And again, one can only answer that question knowing the exact number of our troops in that direction. Even if we did know, we would be limited in what we can reveal. So we can only say some generalities here, that it is a lot what they have. It is a high concentration, and it will be not easy to stop them. So it depends on two factors: what we have as well on our side, and what we'll be using to stop them. The fact that Russian command is not stellar in their achievements, we know that, but they do have a stubborn will to achieve the tasks even when they're not doing it creatively. So we'll see what will happen in Kupiansk. And reserves are usually in a rather good training form in comparison with previous ones. Well, not exactly that thing, Nikolay, because we recently have started seeing captured prisoners of war. There are soldiers who are saying that they only had 10 days of training before they were thrown. So in the span of over a year, this is the first time we're seeing people being rushed into the fight. That also indicates they have some constraints on the personnel side, and given that they still have an advantage in artillery shells, and we don't have any really, and they actually feel a bit better because now they have a steady supply of Korean shells and they're producing their own at a larger number. So they're in a bit better position than in summer. This is a serious factor that makes things difficult for our defense forces. If it was a year and a half ago when drones were not that well developed, I don't know what we would be using to stop them besides infantry. Now the battlefield is very different. What happened before? They would concentrate 60,000 of shells per day, would completely destroy the position of our company, and then move in. We'll probably come back at that situation, take it back, and then they would shell it again and take it. So it was up to our infantry to stop them back in the day. Now we have FPVs and drones. They changed the layout of the battlefield. And now the distance between troops is not 2 kilometers, it's more like 7 or 8 kilometers. Sometimes it's closer, like in Avdiivka, when it's a city situation, there are probably a couple hundred yards. But generally now it's about 7 to 8 kilometers, a rather amorphous line. And everybody that moves there, everything that moves there is usually being hit by an UAV or an FPV or other kind of drone. So even just bring 3 bottles of water and 3 belts of bullets for a machine gun is a non-trivial task in this case. And that stalemate is very similar to the First World War, what Zaluzhny was referring to in his previous interview. And now we're talking about increasing the mass use of drones. There are no technical solutions, whatever the people are saying about AI and other advancements. But what's characteristic, even these numbers of enemy that have advantage in artillery and armored vehicles, FPV drones allow to somewhat hold and destroy. So now everything should be dedicated to UAVs and drones because we are very limited in any other means, thanks to our beloved partners of the West, especially United States, which in critical moment has usually said, well, sorry, we have no money, and just hold on, right? We know you're capable, you guys are strong. So we have a number of publications about United States. We'll get to them a bit later. You did mention Zaluzhny's article in The Economist earlier, but this week he also gave another interview to CNN that was titled "The Design of War Has Changed." And there were several good, important statements in it. How this war is defined, among other things, because he was talking about other wars as well. And he said that, first of all, technological progress is a defining factor, and political conditions inside the country and outside of it, and also, of course, economic environment around it. Zaluzhny says we need to acknowledge that the enemy has advantage in mobilization, and we have to compare that with incapacity of Ukrainian leadership, government, to increase the number of troops without using unpopular measures. And he was also saying that operations that will happen might actually include special control of the radio electronic sphere and perhaps combined attacks of cyber assets and drones in the attacks. So first of all, have you seen any new theses stated by Commander-in-Chief, or do you think he's making this publication hoping that at least the president of Ukraine will be acknowledged of its existence and the facts there, and that he might get the answers to his questions, if he has any, about the plan of actions? And the third question, do you think this publication satisfies the description of the content of strategic plan? You know what I like our time for, Nikolay? That Commander-in-Chief has to communicate with Supreme Commander through the Western media. I do that too. Some of our more attentive listeners see that I'm continuously sending messages to one or the other side, rather in the open, because in the modern world it is the best way to communicate. There were a lot of messages that failed to reach, and I did tell them into their eyes, but they get them through scandals, through media. And people are all saying to me often, Arestovych, why are you so scandalous about different topics? Well, because you don't get it otherwise. This is a universally effective measure right now. Not that I'm scandalous, I'm not. The people who know me, I definitely do not like this method. But I have to use it because it's effective. And Yuriy Zaluzhny is using an effective method as well. He's communicating with our political leadership through Western media, causing scandal after scandal, but it's effective. And again, I don't like this method, but it works. As for thesis, I do agree with him, but I would add one more thing. It says that Russia has advantage in all three factors right now. And the West, in all three factors, is lagging behind. Economy. What else did he mention? Economic situation, political capabilities, and technical progress. The only area where Russia is limping somewhat is technological progress, but they are dwindling that niche by any factor they can, and it's notable. That's why we have said many times why Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, and the other theoreticians and practitioners of war have warned and forewarned about long wars, because the long war gives enough time to adapt, to find a solution. Modern West isn't a trap. The trap is very simple. For 30 years, actually more than that, they are not under threat of big continental war. And their armies are small, highly professional, that is fighting either with partisans or with an army that is 2 generations behind, just like Iraq's army was. And in this situation, neither economic, nor political, nor social effects of such an army are different. These are all different with a small army from a big army. And now Russia is posting another threat as the People's War, as a genre, as a big continental warfare, where you need to change everything. The order of political decisions, the order of setting those goals, the communication between different levels of command, communication from bottom up and top down, types of weaponry, because what the West is, very little, very expensive, super effective arms. What is a big warfare? It requires exactly the opposite, a lot, en masse, generally effective. But it has to be a lot of it. It is used en masse, it is being destroyed en masse, it has to be very effectively produced and cost not much. In this case, it is FPV drone or drone in general. UAV is a good example, and a change in terms of motivation and mobilization. A simple example. In Afghanistan, the Western commander, who has lost 5 soldiers over a year, was considered to be a big tragedy. They would shoot a movie about that. He would go to psychological rehab. He would be asking his mentors, am I a good officer if I lost 5 people? What is a modern warfare in Ukraine? He loses 5 fighters a day in his company. There it was over a year. Here it's in a day. And there is no time for psychologists, no for movies, no for Hollywood scripts or books or anything. It's just a grinder. And the commander of a company who's been, for example, at this position for a year and he somehow survived, which is also a feat in this case, or maybe he was wounded and he came back. His personnel could have changed at least 10 times during that year. Imagine his internal structure of motivation, psychology, and will to survive that, to keep organizing that, and to continue fighting. He looks at people from a different viewpoint. He can care about them as much as he can, but for them, they are expendable. And that causes very serious moves in the psyche of even professional military men. So the approach and the system of motivation needs to change. And Zaluzhny is very precisely highlighting that political leadership is incapable so far to provide a proper level, not completely, but a proper level that he's talking about. And do you know why? Because I'm not talking about that they're not doing everything, they're not fitting the proper level. Because they're not doing lessons learned practice. We are really bad at lessons learned. And that's what Yuriy Butusov wrote in his article, that generals are lying. For us, even the system of collecting the information is very important, and the quality of politician often is being determined by his ability to gather real data and not what you're being fed by your generals and aides. So we have serious issues with that. And our issue is also about taking that mobilization, adopting that mobilization change in legal system. And today there was a people's rights defender who came out and said, well, by the way, that electronic office of the recruit is actually against human rights. And that might have consequences because the Western partners might actually look at that and stop giving us money because we violate human rights, right? Somehow, after a big discussion on the West, if somebody ignites it. So we are facing a super task that is a most important task for Ukrainian government and Ukraine as a country, which basically depends upon us successfully solving it. We need to resolve mobilization matter properly. And we can't do that because we suck at lessons learned. But we're trying to somehow solve it, right? As a society, it's a difficult task, it's non-trivial. The real information still pours in, even though the nasty propaganda about 1991 borders demotivates and spills in. It is a huge demotivator for people fighting on the front, because those in our trenches, they have about 40,000 of Russian troops against them on some parts of the front, a complete advantage in shells, and they on the other side, and they also have up to half of their personnel refusing to fight. And that's when they hear about the borders of 91, that fully demotivates them, because what do they think? And they're members of families, and thank God it's millions of people who are their relatives and friends. They start to think that political leadership is inadequate, and that doesn't add any comfort or any assurance for the future. And on the backdrop of huge losses that every war imposes on society, this is a huge factor that changes the structure of society. Our political model right now is hanging by a thread and is grumping. And you can see that, you can follow through if you look at the relations between Supreme Commander-in-Chief and Commander-in-Chief, all the complexity of that situation right now. So what's going on is that we can at least partially do lessons learned here. But we need to be much better in Ukraine, much, much better. The only guys who seem to learn well are the Poles across the border. They recently were looking at our experience with mobilization, and first of all, they increased the penalty, and they said up to 5 years in prison for refusing to mobilize when you called upon. And they're trying to be ready to the next historic challenge that may happen rather soon for them. On the other hand, United States are somewhere in the skies. Military guys are trying, but politicians are so far removed. The only advantage there is that those people who talk about the real threat of the East and Russia, they are not being arrested or suppressed. They can communicate freely. Otherwise, I'm communicating with the analysts here, even the better of them, and they hope for the same. They hope for technical advantage for small, motivated professional armies, aviation and fleet that might stop Russia because of technical advantage. But material reserves for these armies are very small. Of course, their first strikes would be very serious. If they use all the Tomahawks and all, they would probably destroy half the industrial capacity, half the airfields, half the equipment. But then this stockpile will be depleted, and then after that it will be infantry against infantry, same as we have here on the front. And I do not see people in the West who can come up in the quantity of 600,000 on the theater from Baltic Sea to the southern borders of Poland, or at least central borders of Poland near Belarus, who would fight for Suwalki corridor. You'd need at the very least 200,000 to fight for some areas, and to be able to fight from a 5-yard distance, throwing grenades and attacking somebody who is really entrenched well for 30 minutes, throwing grenades, and he'd still be shooting at you. Or to be one like that, right, who is in a position that is being constantly attacked. They don't have such infantry right now. And this is the long advantage of Russian Federation at this moment, that can post 600,000 angry and motivated soldiers especially after the global attack of NATO, who will walk, even with the most basic of rifles, into the Western territories near Suwalki and the Baltics. And on the West, what can they do against that? They would have infantry who would probably be like 50,000 of them, very well trained, maybe $200,000 on their shoulders of different equipment. Well, these 50,000 will be depleted rather fast. Just like that Russian Special Operation Forces were done with in the first few days near Gostomel, who perished all there under the hits of artillery, and artillery doesn't care how well trained you are, if you're a professional or fresh recruit. And then you're facing the proposition of the trench warfare, and they're not ready for that. So I have a question. When the West announced that Iran and Russia, North Korea and China as the axis of evil, while all these countries is capable of giving out altogether millions of motivated infantrymen, you would not be hunting down every one of them with Tomahawk, right? Or an FPV for that matter. What were they expecting from that situation? Were they still dancing on the fumes of the win of the Cold War? And they were telling the world that they might win Gaddafi's and Hussein's with Tomahawks. Well, the type of war has changed. The East is now not afraid of the West. The West continues to conduct mad, unsupported by anything, political line, although now more and more voices are rising that, hey, we need to change things and we need to be able to produce those million artillery shells a year. But even if they make all the decisions tomorrow, which I have my reservations about, they're bureaucratic. The experts are saying that at best they'll be ready by 2026 or 2027. And now, attention, who will give them this time? So You should be performing a well-supported politics. Political statements need to be supported by force and capability. We are in a little better in terms of experience now, but we're really bad in terms of support. The bad thing is that the bad thing is we don't have that much support. The good thing is that Russian generals are generally sucky in the way they use the resources, because if I had 40,000 troops and 500 tanks, I have an illusion that I would be more effective than those Russians and how they use them. But yeah, we're lucky that it takes them 4 months or 6 months to concentrate troops to take Avdiivka, a small township, and then maybe on the 6 months of trying to take it, they will take it, having suffered huge losses in armor and personnel, having taken a small regional center. With that tempo of war, it's still pretty far to Warsaw, but still, there is a big question here. If the Poles and the Baltic countries and those Portugal or Spanish battalions will be fighting as fiercely as Ukrainian infantry is in human conditions. And with all my respect to our partners, I have serious concerns if they can do that, because anthropotype of the West has changed. We preserved the earlier version, who can fight. Russians also did. But if the West can do that, I am very emboldened, that very, very concerned. And as for technical advantage, they're not making conclusions. Otherwise, we would see very different tempo of growth of military production capability. Well, that was rather encompassing answer. Let's go to a potential firing question of Zaluzhny, because President acknowledged that he is thinking about it in his interview with the TV channel Rai1, Italian. And he answered to the question if he's going to fire Zaluzhny. He's answered that I'm saying about something serious that is not only about one person, but overall leadership of the country. When I'm talking about that, I mean rotation of several government leaders, not only in one sphere, such as the military. I'm thinking about that change of Zaluzhny, but we cannot say that we're just replacing one person, highlighted the president. That statement was criticized, that thesis was criticized, and was questioned about the direction that he is talking about, that he wants to change personnel for. And essentially, you read through his statement that he's trying to base his decision that he is not firing Zaluzhny single as a person, because it would be considered as political assassination. He's giving some background that he's trying to do it in a different fashion. Do you think this is what he's doing? He's performing an art around that action? Do you know how analysts are being taught in different services, and how I teach in my school as well? So, however some concealed ideation is hidden, sooner or later, the systemic actions will reveal that to you. So despite of all the informational garbage floating in the sphere, there are different things coming out indicating about that Zaluzhny likely will be replaced, and not only him. First, translating from what the president said to the general simple language, I want to change a lot in the military and enforcement agencies leadership, because I acknowledge that the previous manner of fighting and previous strategy of war is not effective. I have a new strategy. I will not tell you that. But that new strategy requires a new type of leadership. And that's what comes out of his interview. The good part, that he seems to have a vision. The bad part, he is not telling it us. Well, it's times of war, so understandably, maybe. And he is supposedly picking other candidates for these positions. And it would be all right. But today, in a Telegram channel that has a direct relation with Ukraine leadership, there is an interesting note that Poroshenko, ex-president, is being accused in the attempt to overthrow the government. And Goncharenko, one of his former supporters, congressman, who's now working with SBU, supposedly is writing on Zaluzhny, on Poroshenko. And now apparently in the news that our investigative committee finished the case about a certain pipe, Chukotsky pipe, and that supposedly Poroshenko is quickly going to become from a suspect into the accused. And looking at that, I want to say that on Bankovskaya Street, where Zelensky resides, they have a good sense of the possible political threats. And they're seeing that connection between Zaluzhny and Poroshenko as a possibility. Poroshenko is a very strong player. He has a lot of financial resources. He's smart. He's a good combinator. He's got enough will. He's got enough power, and his huge media resource, in conjunction with experience of being a president and having political weight in the country. If he joins that with the people's idol of Yuriy Zaluzhny, and that's his current status indeed. Recent polling showed that Zaluzhny wins over president in any combination, and wins over him twice in the number of votes. So what is a good politician that our listeners very often do not understand? It's much more difficult to grow a politician, a good scale politician in your country, than to grow an astronaut. It's dozens of years and tens of millions of dollars, generally, and there are no guarantees as well. So, Yuriy Zaluzhny, by the decision of fate, is such a politician now. Do you think those players who are using politics in their own interests and they organize different sides in the country, do you think they would waste time and resources growing a new figure when they have a candidate such as Zaluzhny? Of course, they're all trying to get a hold of him. And one of the key figures who is willing to play on this field is Poroshenko. He's got media resource, he's got the administrative resource, he understands really well what a good politician is. And he can offer Zaluzhny a combination when you would be a president, Valeria, and I will be your prime minister, an experienced one who will be able to advise and support our work. And who would be able to tell to the young and starting politician Zaluzhny how to carry it through. And Zaluzhny is, in essence, a representative of people's will. He's loved for his effort to resist, to fight the war, and to push the Russians out. So the office of the president understands that real well, that there is a threat, that these two will put them as a butter on a sandwich and will devour them in one bite. And firing of Zaluzhny as a tragedy, it doesn't look like a tragedy from Poroshenko's standpoint, because he stops being a military leader, but he becomes a retiree and a much higher legitimacy figure than president. He's basically a non-alternative figure. It's a future leader of Ukraine, however you turn it, unless some black swans happen. What do you think the bureaucrats will do and the smaller political players will do when this duo shapes up? Yeah, they'll run, exactly. So at some point, Zelensky and his Bankovskaya Street may find out that their orders are not carried out, and that everybody on the political side is already in the camp of Zaluzhny and Poroshenko. So they're seriously afraid on the political side. Don't care if it's personal or political fear that they experience. I'm not including names or positions. We're just naming figures on the chessboard, reviewing the possible situation. They're seriously concerned. For them, it means a serious political loss, the final of their political career, either in the future or right now. Or let's think about them in a good light, maybe a chance to lose control of the country during difficult times when things need to be effective. Because when bureaucrat runs to another side, to your opposition, that's when you lose control. So the main problem in this connection is that it needs to be broken, right? If you attack Zaluzhny, that's suicide right now. You can only fire him. You cannot jail him right now, because people will probably storm and remove everybody who will try to jail him. And at the same time, Poroshenko is not being liked. His anti-rating is in the 80s, so there are a lot of questions to him, and this is the figure that you can attack to break this connection. And that's what they're doing. Generally, I'm not using any moral categories here. without last names. Well, we had to say Poroshenko because it already has a symbolic meaning and they're already talking about him. I'm not meaning him as a live person out of meat and bones, but him as a political figure like Poroshenko, to not explain too far. Main features, media magnate, very resourceful. To not repeat that, I'm saying Poroshenko as an example. But there is only one danger, and they fell into that trap before. When they tried to arrest Poroshenko before the war, and they failed to do that, they actually had to fire the police investigator, the girl who was involved in this, because they failed to. And when people came out in terms of 5,000 and stopped power from giving the court writ to Poroshenko, so I did tell the power, and I was in the office at the time, I said, well, next time he'll bring 30,000 to stop you. And then Poroshenko did the whole theater. He, on his own volition, came to the court to be investigated, to answer the questions, and whatever. The office of the president at that time folded. They refused to prosecute and to go further, so that's when I quit the first time. Now it's interesting. I don't know if they will be able to put Poroshenko in, so-called Poroshenko in jail to break this feature, a possible duel. If they manage to put him in jail, they will add more popularity to him. And it wouldn't mean that this connection will be broken, because even being in jail, he still has influence and potential. They might actually involuntarily embolden that connection between these two politicians. And their only ally in this case, and I'm giving them a hint, the only ally in this case, my friends, is being sober and adequate in judging the situation by Yuriy Zaluzhny. And you need not to attack him, but need to talk to him logically and reasonably. He understands that he will become a big, probably non-alternative figure for wherever he goes as a politician the moment he is fired. But he thinks about the destiny of people first, as a normal military officer, and only lastly about himself. So that's the side of Zaluzhny you should appeal to this reason, to this proclivity to think for the common good in him. But are they ready to use these terms and to treat him well like that? I have concerns, because people who likely will be ordered to deal with the situation probably don't even know these concepts. And I'm thinking they'll be working against this possible political alliance in a much smaller spectrum of the situation, not in a broader scope as I was describing now. And among Poroshenko people, there are a lot of good specialists, but they have a few drawbacks among them. There is that concept, army, language, faith, that is breaking Ukraine, breaking our country, maybe making it only making a country as a result of just 9 regions on the west, as a result of that language and absolutist position. And they're also cannibalistic. They take political figures, they suck the juices out of them, and then they dump them. They use the charm to beef themselves up on their side up, and then they step away when somebody gets disappointed. We remember Reefmaster and all that story with assassination of Sheremet. We remember the Sergeant Zhuravel, rest he in peace, who died at the beginning of the peace accords at the summer of 20, when Zelensky organized that during, I think it was 19 or 20, sorry, I don't remember the exact year, when Zelensky just got to power. That's when it happened. They used to take these figures and dump them. Now they're trying to do the same thing with Zaluzhny, and as always trying to tear their shirt apart and pump up Zaluzhny figure to some sky-high levels. And you can read in their channels, don't you dare touch his figure, we'll protect him to the last blood. But they're very cynical, actually, about him. And I want to say that Zaluzhny will be able to make his decisions on his own, how to interact with them. There is no way Bankovskaya can affect him, and he has 30 years of practical management experience. military management experience. This is strong. He may not have enough political experience, but he has enough managerial experience, and I don't think Bankovskaya can overplay him, can win over him in this situation. And now, since I do care about the common good, and I did fulfill my duty with the society by explaining the situation, we can continue with other questions. I would allow one statement here, if you're not against it. It's a known political technology of how to wash out your political opponents and other faces. Because very often, new face cannot afford to be associated with an old face, right? The old face is often hated. So here, they are trying to connect Zaluzhny with the older politician. And now we have two sides fighting for attracting Zaluzhny to their political leadership. In this case, it's to Poroshenko, and unless the story about attempt of coup is something real. Well, we'll see if that is real or not very soon. But the fact that it was spilled into the pro-Zaluzhny political Telegram channel is rather symbolic. That would not have appeared there. And especially when it's also peddled by Goncharenko, ex-mate of Poroshenko. I here want to tell that even after his termination in any or resignation in any capacity, any statement that he makes, any move that he makes, because everybody will be attacking him, trying to get him to make political statements. This would mark the beginning of his personal political biography, and the price of a mistake there would be very high. But knowing him for a long time, I want to say that he is a very good person. He's a very ethical one and much more complicated than many political figures are trying to portray him as. And I hope that he will cope with that. So, you said there is not much happening to attack Zaluzhny recently, but I was tracking a lot of media, and I think some of the journalists start to break that border and actually try to invade and attack Zaluzhny. And I've been noticing an interesting motion there that some of the journalists are saying, taking the point of who Zaluzhny is he even worth the things we put on him? Did he really do all that by himself? So I was thinking maybe we should highlight a few things where Ukraine definitely owes a lot to Zaluzhny, and would or should the defense of Ukraine, defense at large, defense of Kiev, successful operations in Kherson and Kharkov. Do you think, and you've seen all that, what was his part, his play in all that? Oh, you mean those rotten Ivanov and Petrov? Yeah, different people. Yeah, these two recently had a stream, the favorite Ukrainian song, Who Are You, Zaluzhny? Why Are You So Worthy? I want to say that these two rats have been fed by the office of the president from the beginning. So, according to some rumors, they recently were dumped. When I was with the office, they were working as pet bunnies and were doing everything that they were told to do. And now they're using some roundabout manners and trying to play the same flute of the office, trying to get back in favor, and now they're attacking Zaluzhny again. But you understand that this behavior sooner or later ends, so which you can just wish them all kinds of success and quick career in this path. I'm speaking satirically. And yeah, regardless of names, there are other journalists who said that too. As for Zaluzhny, one needs to understand that right now he will be attacked by everybody. Everybody will try to pull him apart, to either have him as an ally or to attack him. And the favorite game that Ukrainians like to play, who is he and what is he so famous for? Is he really the salt? I want to say that he's probably the best military leader we have right now. and he is also very ethical. He's a person who, during the 2-year massive bloody war that doesn't support oneself, saving, preserving his humanity and human factor, because if you're really, it's a enforced measure. Usually, military men become much less caring about people, because otherwise you would either have a heart attack or you'll go mad or become. Your other option is to become cynical. So he did not become cynical. There are a lot of questions that are being posted at him that it's such a disorganization in the army, and Zaluzhny is on top of it. I want to say it's very difficult to pinpoint the exact level of his responsibility in that, because it's not only him. It's Minister of Defense, it's Congress, it's Cabinet of Ministers, and people as well, because army is a combination of people. If you have too many drunks or refusers drafted, even if you're the best commander, there's nothing you can do. So we cannot set the real degree of his responsibility for the drawbacks. Probably historians will in the long range, in the long term. But they likely will be appealing, those who attack Zaluzhny now, they'll be appealing to emotions. They'll be probably screaming that Kiev battle was won by Syrsky, Kharkov operation was Syrsky, army is in disarray, too much paperwork. There'll be a lot of attacks on him in this capacity, because the moment he becomes a political figure, he has supporters, but of course he has political opponents. So we can just wish upon him more political strength, and I think he has enough, because they'll try to stifle him in any way they can. And the main warning I can say is that the ones who will be attacking him politically will be the ones who will be shaking his hand and smiling at him in real life. This is Norman politics. We will not abandon Valery, we'll continue giving hints. And my thesis here is very simple. Attacks against Zaluzhny, whether based or not, emotional or otherwise, will be strengthening with every day, the moment he becomes a political figure. And he'll become a political figure immediately after his resignation. The push will be very strong, push for his love and support, as well as the push to dethrone him. I wish him all kinds of good success in this path, and we'll be trying to advise him to as much as we can and try to draw away some of that flack and prevent some situations here live on these streams.